Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Ozark County, Missouri. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1872. Spring had just begun to touch the Ozark Mountains with its gentle warmth when the first reports of Lillian Cray's strange behavior reached the town of Gainesville. Nestled in the rolling hills of southern Missouri, Ozark County was known for its dense forests, clear springs, and tight-lipped residents who kept to themselves. The Cray family homestead stood approximately 3 miles north of Bryant Creek, isolated by a thick grove of oak and hickory trees. According to county records filed that same year, the property comprised 87 acres of mostly wooded land with a modest clearing where a 2-story farmhouse had been built some 20 years prior by the previous owners, the Garretson family, who had relocated to California during the gold rush of 1849. The house itself was constructed primarily of local timber with a stone foundation and chimney built from limestone quarried nearby. A hand-drawn map included in the 1872 tax assessment shows the main house positioned at the eastern edge of the property with 3 cleared fields of varying sizes scattered among the woodland. The largest field, approximately 5 acres, lay directly south of the house and had been used primarily for growing corn. A smaller field to the east was dedicated to vegetables and herbs. And then there was the western field, the focal point of our account, which measured slightly less than 1 acre and sat approximately 200 yards from the main house, separated from it by a stand of particularly dense oak trees. Lillian Cray, aged 32 in 1872, had lived alone on the property since the passing of her husband Thomas in the winter of 1869. The official cause of death was listed as pneumonia, though several accounts from the period suggest a lingering doubt about this conclusion. The county death register notes that Thomas Cray, aged 39, succumbed to inflammation of the lungs following a prolonged illness, but a marginal note added by Dr. Samuel Hatcher indicates unusual symptoms not consistent with typical cases. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not the death itself, but what transpired in the years that followed, culminating in what locals would later refer to as the incident at Cray Hollow. From the journal of Dr. Samuel Hatcher, the county's only physician at the time, called to the Cray residence on April 17, 1872. The patient, Mrs. Lillian Cray, presented with no obvious physical ailments, though she appeared significantly undernourished and spoke in a manner I can only describe as detached. Her primary complaint was an inability to sleep, due to what she termed the sounds from the western field. Upon examination of said field, nothing unusual was observed. Mrs. Cray insisted the sounds were most pronounced at dusk and dawn. I provided a tincture of valerian root to aid sleep and recommended increased nutrition. Patient declined my suggestion to stay with family in town for a period of rest. This entry is notable for several reasons. First, it establishes that Lillian's fixation on the western field began at least by mid-April of 1872, though whether it originated earlier remains unknown. Second, it confirms that she was already experiencing physical decline, suggesting that whatever process was underway had been affecting her for some time. And third, the reference to family in town is curious, as no other records indicate that Lillian had relatives in Gainesville or the surrounding area. The Crays had moved to Ozark County from Pennsylvania in 1867, and by all accounts were somewhat isolated from the community. What Dr. Hatcher couldn't have known then was that his visit marked the beginning of a descent into what can only be described as a profound obsession, one that would eventually consume not only Lillian Cray but several others in the community. According to tax records from 1872, the western field mentioned in Dr. Hatcher's notes was the smallest of 3 cleared areas on the Cray property. It measured approximately 1 acre and had been left fallow for at least 2 seasons. Neighbors reported that Thomas Cray had refused to work that particular plot in the year before his death, though no explanation was ever recorded as to why. Martha Danvers, whose property bordered the northern edge of the Cray land, stated in a letter to her sister dated September 1871, "Thomas has abandoned the western field entirely, though it previously yielded well. When pressed, he claims only that the soil has turned, whatever that might mean." Elizabeth Wilson says he once told her husband it was bitter ground, but would say no more on the subject. This reference to bitter ground is one of several suggestions that Thomas Cray had his own concerns about the western field before his death. Whether these concerns were related to agricultural productivity or something more unusual cannot be determined from the available records. What is clear is that by the time of Lillian's consultation with Dr. Hatcher in April 1872, the field had been untouched for some time. Lillian's fixation with the western field appeared to begin in early spring of 1872. Martha Danvers, whose property bordered the northern edge of the Cray land, provided a statement to the county sheriff in June of that year. "I would see her standing at the edge of that field, sometimes from dawn until dusk, just staring at the ground. She wouldn't respond when called to. It was as if she didn't hear me at all, though I know she must have. It wasn't natural the way she stood so still. Even when it rained, she would remain there, becoming soaked through before finally returning to the house. On one occasion in late May, I approached close enough to hear her speaking, though there was no one else present. She seemed to be having a conversation with the field itself, pausing as if listening to responses that I could not hear. This behavior continued for several weeks, with Lillian spending increasingly long periods at the edge of the field. The weather journal kept by Elijah Thompson, an amateur meteorologist who lived some 5 miles away, indicates that the spring of 1872 was unusually wet, with frequent thunderstorms throughout April and May. That Lillian would stand exposed to these conditions for hours at a time suggests a level of compulsion that transcended physical discomfort. By May, Lillian had reportedly begun to dig in the western field. Initially, these were shallow explorations, small holes no more than a foot deep scattered, seemingly at random across the acre of land. James Wilson, a farmhand who occasionally assisted Widow Cray with heavier tasks, noted in his later testimony, "She said she was testing the soil, but there wasn't any method to it that I could see. Just digging, then listening with her ear to the ground, then moving on. I offered to help, but she refused rather sharply, saying it was her work alone to do. When I asked what she was listening for, she just smiled in a way that made me uneasy. Said she was getting to know the voices. I didn't press further. Figured grief affects people in strange ways sometimes." Wilson's account introduces the first mention of voices associated with the field, a theme that would recur in later descriptions of Lillian's behavior. Whether these voices were a manifestation of mental instability, a metaphorical description of natural sounds, or something else entirely remains one of the central mysteries of the case. What is particularly noteworthy about this period is the rapid deterioration in Lillian's appearance and social standing. Once described as handsome and well-kept in a newspaper account of her wedding in 1865, by mid-1872 she had become, according to multiple sources, unkempt and wild-eyed. Her rare appearances in Gainesville were marked by hushed conversations that ceased when she approached and resumed as she passed. A letter from Reverend Isaiah Powell to his brother in Springfield, dated May 28, 1872, offers some insight. "The widow Cray attended service again this Sunday, though I almost wish she hadn't. Her presence disturbs the congregation terribly. She sits alone, her clothes soiled with dirt, whispering to herself throughout the sermon. When approached after the service, she speaks only of what she calls the work, saying that soon we will all understand its importance. I fear her mind has been affected by grief, yet there is something in her manner that suggests not confusion or despair, but a terrible clarity of purpose. She no longer appears to be the same woman who joined our congregation with her husband 5 years ago. There is a hardness to her gaze, an intensity that is most unsettling. This description of terrible clarity rather than confusion challenges the simplistic explanation that Lillian was simply suffering from mental illness following her husband's death. Grief can certainly manifest in unusual behaviors, but the focused nature of her obsession suggests something more directed was at work. As May turned to June, Lillian's digging in the western field became more methodical. According to Martha Danvers, who observed the activity from her property, she began to work in a pattern, starting from the center of the field and moving outward in what looked like a spiral. Each day she would begin at first light and continue until dusk, stopping only occasionally for water. I never saw her eat during these sessions. By the end of June, much of the field had been disturbed, with small mounds of earth arranged in lines that seemed to form some kind of design when viewed from a distance. The reference to a design or pattern appears in several accounts from this period. While no drawings or detailed descriptions of this pattern exist in official records, the implication is that Lillian's work had evolved from random exploration to something more deliberate and planned. The digging intensified as summer progressed. What had begun as scattered holes evolved into a more systematic excavation. By July, a significant portion of the western field had been turned over, creating what one witness described as a patchwork of earth, like graves dug but never filled. The comparison to graves, while perhaps merely descriptive, takes on a more ominous tone in light of later events. It was during this period that Lillian began to keep detailed records of her work. A leather-bound journal recovered from the property in 1887 during the settling of the estate contains meticulous notes on the excavation. The handwriting, initially neat and controlled, grows increasingly erratic as the pages progress. An entry from July 3rd reads, "Sector 7 yielded nothing but the usual soil and rock. The sounds are stronger in Sector 8, particularly at dusk. Tomorrow I will go deeper. They are guiding me closer. I can feel the vibrations through the soles of my feet now, not just hear them." Thomas was wrong to fear this. What lies beneath is not malevolent. It is simply waiting for someone who can understand its language, its purpose. I am beginning to understand. This entry is significant for several reasons. First, it confirms that Lillian was working according to some kind of systematic grid or map, dividing the field into sectors. Second, it suggests that her husband had indeed been aware of something unusual about the western field and had responded with fear rather than curiosity. And third, it introduces the concept that whatever Lillian believed was beneath the field had a language and purpose that she was attempting to decipher. A subsequent entry, dated July 12th, becomes more concerning. Discovered unusual stone formations in Sector 11 at a depth of approximately 4 feet. Not natural. The patterns are too regular, the surfaces too smooth in places. Extracted several samples. When held to the ear, the largest specimen emits a faint but discernible tone, like a tuning fork struck softly. Must expand this excavation tomorrow. The reference to unnatural stone formations is the first suggestion that Lillian may have uncovered something genuinely anomalous, rather than merely projecting meaning onto natural phenomena. Whether these formations were archaeological in nature, perhaps remnants of indigenous structures, or geological oddities, is impossible to determine from her description alone. By mid-July, the nature of Lillian's work had become the primary topic of conversation in Gainesville. Speculation ranged from the sympathetic that grief had unhinged her mind to the suspicious. Some suggested she was searching for money that Thomas might have hidden before his death. Others, particularly those inclined toward superstition, whispered darker theories. An account from Elias Jenkins, owner of the general store in Gainesville, suggests the level of concern in the community. She came in for supplies, picks, shovels, lanterns, rope, more than one person needs, certainly more than a woman alone could use. When I asked what for, she just smiled and said she was preparing to receive a visitor, paid in cash, which was surprising considering the state of her and the farm. The coins were old, too. Spanish dollars from before the war, the kind you don't see much anymore. Made me wonder where they'd come from, as Thomas Cray never struck me as a wealthy man. The mention of a visitor appears repeatedly in accounts from this period, though Lillian never clarified whom she expected. No relatives are mentioned in any records, and the Crays, who had moved to Ozark County from Pennsylvania in 1867, had few connections outside the immediate area. The reference to Spanish dollars is equally puzzling, as such currency, while still occasionally in circulation in the 1870s, was uncommon. Whether these coins represented some previously unknown cache of wealth or were obtained through other means remains unexplained. As July gave way to August, the focus of Lillian's excavation shifted. According to James Wilson, she had me help her move lumber from the barn to the western field. Heavy beams that had been intended for a new stable that Thomas never got around to building. When I asked what they were for, she said she needed to shore up the deeper sections to prevent collapse. Made sense, I suppose, though I never saw how deep she'd actually gone. She wouldn't let me near the main dig site, had me leave the materials at the edge of the field. This account suggests that by August, the excavation had progressed beyond simple test holes to something substantial enough to require structural support. The use of support beams indicates depths of at least several feet, perhaps more. An entry in Lillian's journal from August 7th provides more detail. The main shaft now extends 12 feet below surface. Lateral tunnel begun in northerly direction, following the line of stones. Air quality poor at current depth. Constructed a simple bellow system using kitchen materials. Progress slower than I would like, but they assure me we are close. The humming is nearly constant now, vibrating through the stones and into my bones. I no longer need to sleep. The reference to a line of stones aligns with her earlier mention of unusual stone formations, suggesting she had uncovered something that extended horizontally beneath the field. More troubling is the casual reference to not needing sleep, which, if taken literally, indicates a significant deterioration in her physical condition or perception of it. By August, the digging had taken a new and more disturbing direction. According to James Wilson, who continued to deliver supplies to the Cray farm through the summer, the holes got deeper, more like shafts than holes. She dug one in particular near the western edge that must have been 15 feet deep, had a rope ladder going down. She wouldn't let me near it, stood in front with a shotgun once when I tried to look, said it wasn't ready for visitors yet. Her eyes were different then, glassy, like she had a fever. But she moved and spoke precisely. Wasn't ill, just changed. The mention of the shotgun marks a significant escalation in Lillian's behavior. Previously described as withdrawn or eccentric, by August she had apparently become actively defensive of her work, willing to threaten violence to maintain its privacy. This represents a concerning shift from peculiarity to potential danger. It was around this time that the first disappearance occurred. Herbert Leach, a 26-year-old drifter who had been taking odd jobs in the area, was last seen on August 12, 1872. According to the account given by Samuel Green, who had employed Leach to help with the tobacco harvest, he said he'd been offered good money to help the Cray widow with some digging work, said he'd be back in a few days. Never saw him again. Didn't think much of it at the time. Drifters come and go. But in light of what happened later, it takes on a different cast. The disappearance of Leach did not initially cause significant concern. Transient workers frequently moved on without notice, particularly as harvest season provided opportunities across the region. However, his absence would later take on a more sinister aspect in light of subsequent events. A curious entry appears in Lillian's journal on August 15th. H. proves both stronger and more amenable than expected. With his assistance, we have extended the main tunnel to nearly 30 feet, following the curve of the formation. He asks few questions, which is just as well. Some things cannot be explained, only experienced. Soon he will understand as I do. The reference to H, presumably Herbert Leach, confirms that Lillian had indeed hired him to assist with the excavation. The entry suggests that as of August 15th, Leach was still working at the Cray farm, 3 days after he was last seen in Gainesville. What happened to him after this date is not recorded in the journal, at least not explicitly. As summer gave way to fall, reports indicate that Lillian's excavation efforts became even more focused and intense. A letter from Martha Danvers to her sister in St. Louis, dated September 18th, suggests the scale of the work. The digging has transformed the field entirely. From my property, I can see what appears to be the entrance to a tunnel or cavern. Lights can be seen there at all hours of the night. The widow no longer acknowledges me when our paths cross. Her eyes seem to look through rather than at me, as if she perceives something beyond the visible world. Most disturbing of all, I have begun to hear sounds from the direction of the field at night, a rhythmic tapping or knocking that seems to follow no pattern I can discern. I find myself avoiding that side of my property now, particularly after dark. The reference to a tunnel or cavern is particularly significant given the geological characteristics of Ozark County. The region is known for its extensive cave systems, formed by the erosion of limestone bedrock over millions of years. While no major caves were documented on the Cray property prior to 1872, smaller karst features would not have been unusual. What is unusual is Martha's description of lights visible at all hours of the night, suggesting that work continued uninterrupted, regardless of the natural cycle of day and night. A journal entry from Lillian, dated September 22nd, reads, "The chamber is larger than I initially believed. The walls bear markings, not natural erosion, but deliberate carvings. Geometric patterns primarily, though some suggest stylized figures or symbols. H refuses to enter this section, claims the air makes him dizzy. Weakness. What we have discovered here will reshape understanding. The voices are clear now, almost like speech. They know me by name." This entry introduces several disturbing elements. The reference to deliberate carving suggests that whatever Lillian had discovered was not entirely natural, either a previously unknown archaeological site or something she herself was altering. The mention of H confirms that Herbert Leach was still present at this time, more than a month after he was last seen publicly, and the claim that voices knew Lillian by name represents a significant escalation in her apparent delusions or perceptions. What makes this case so disturbing is the transformation that occurred not just in the landscape, but in Lillian herself. By October, she had ceased all interaction with the community. Deliveries left at the edge of the property would disappear, but no one reported seeing her. Smoke continued to rise from the chimney of the house, and lights moved occasionally behind the windows. But Lillian Cray had effectively vanished from public life. A note found later, pinned to the door of the Cray house and addressed to James Wilson, reads simply, "No further deliveries required. The work enters its final phase. Payment enclosed for services rendered." Attached to the note was a small leather pouch containing several more of the Spanish silver dollars previously mentioned. In early October, Dr. Hatcher attempted a follow-up visit to check on Lillian's condition. His journal records called at the Cray residence October 3rd. No response to repeated knocking. House appeared occupied but untended. Windows dirty, garden overgrown. Proceeded to Western Field based on reports of activity there. Found extensive excavation, including what appears to be the entrance to a substantial tunnel supported by wooden beams. No sign of Mrs. Cray or any other individuals. A peculiar odor emanated from the tunnel entrance, not the expected earthiness, but something sharper, almost chemical in nature. Left a note requesting Mrs. Cray contact me regarding her health. Felt most uneasy in the vicinity of the excavation, though cannot articulate precisely why. The doctor's reference to a peculiar odor is notable, as it represents the first suggestion that something physically unusual beyond mere digging was occurring at the site. Whether this odor was the result of natural processes, such as gas escaping from newly exposed geological features, or something related to Lillian's activities, cannot be determined. The second disappearance occurred in late October. Jonathan Pruitt, a land surveyor working for the county, was mapping properties along Bryant Creek when he reportedly decided to investigate the unusual activities on the Cray farm. According to his assistant, Michael Farley, Pruitt had expressed concerns about possible dangers from unrecorded caves or sinkholes. From Farley's statement to Sheriff Davis on October 27th, Mr. Pruitt said he would just have a quick look at what the widow was doing and be back before sunset. He walked toward the western field around 3 in the afternoon. When he hadn't returned by dark, I went looking, but found no trace. The property seemed deserted, though I admit I was reluctant to venture too close to the excavation site itself. There was something about it, a feeling of wrongness that I cannot properly explain. I called Mr. Pruitt's name several times but received no response. As night fell, I thought I heard sounds from the direction of the field, a sort of rhythmic tapping or knocking, but convinced myself it was merely an animal or the wind in the trees. A search party organized the following day found no sign of Pruitt on the Cray property or the surrounding area. What they did find, however, was evidence of extensive tunneling in the western field. Sheriff Davis's report describes a complex of shafts and horizontal passages, clearly the work of many hands, though reportedly only the widow and perhaps the missing leech had been working the site. The main shaft descends at a steep angle for approximately 20 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Due to concerns about structural stability and inadequate lighting, we did not venture beyond this point. No sign of Mr. Pruitt was found in the accessible portions of the excavation. The implication that the excavation was too extensive to have been accomplished by 1 or 2 people over a few months raised troubling questions. Either Lillian had engaged more help than was publicly known, or the tunnels predated her activities. Neither explanation was comfortable for the residents of Gainesville to contemplate. A curious entry appears in Lillian's journal dated October 28th, the day after Pruitt's disappearance. An uninvited guest today claimed official business but was clearly motivated by base curiosity. I showed him what he so desperately wanted to see. His reaction was disappointing. Fear rather than understanding. Some minds are too limited to comprehend the significance of what lies beneath. He will be useful nonetheless. The chamber requires offerings. The chilling implication of this entry, that Lillian not only encountered Pruitt, but may have been responsible for his disappearance, represents a significant escalation in the case. The reference to offerings is particularly disturbing, suggesting a ritualistic element to her activities that had not been previously documented. Following Pruitt's disappearance, Sheriff Davis attempted to interview Lillian but found the house empty. A thorough search of the property was conducted on October 29th, with particular attention paid to the tunnels in the western field. The sheriff's report indicates that the main shaft descended approximately 20 feet before opening into a series of narrow passages. Due to concerns about structural stability and the lack of proper equipment, the search party did not venture far into the tunnel system. What the official report does not mention, but which appears in a private letter from one of the search party members to his brother, is the discovery of several unusual items at the tunnel entrance. We found a table of sorts constructed from rough planks with leather straps attached to its surface. Nearby was a collection of tools, some recognizable as mining implements, others of no clear purpose, with curved blades and peculiar handles. The sheriff had these removed before they were recorded in the official inventory. Also present were numerous candles arranged in a geometric pattern on the ground, many partially burned. The whole scene suggested some kind of ceremony or ritual rather than mere excavation. This unofficial account aligns disturbingly with Lillian's journal reference to offerings and suggests that her activities may have evolved beyond simple digging into something more ceremonial or ritualistic in nature. The report concludes with a recommendation that the site be properly surveyed and potentially filled in, as it represented a hazard. However, no immediate action was taken, partly due to questions about jurisdiction and partly due to the approach of winter, which would have made extensive work difficult. Through November, the Cray property appeared abandoned. No smoke rose from the chimney, no lights moved in the windows. Some in the community suggested that Lillian had simply moved on, perhaps overcome by grief or fear following Pruitt's disappearance. Others maintained that she remained, hidden somewhere within the house or the tunnels beneath the western field. Martha Danvers reported hearing mechanical sounds from the direction of the field on several nights in mid-November, a grinding or scraping as of stone against stone, but no visual confirmation of activity was obtained. The weather during this period was particularly harsh, with an early winter storm bringing several inches of snow to the area on November 12th, followed by an extended period of freezing temperatures. A final entry appears in Lillian's journal, dated November 30th. The cold impedes our progress but cannot stop it. The chamber walls continue to reveal their secrets as we clear away the centuries of accumulated sediment. The markings tell a story older than human memory, of those who came before and what they left behind. What sleeps beneath the hills is stirring now, responding to our efforts. The others arrive tomorrow. With their assistance, the final phase can begin. I have prepared the house for their stay, though few will require conventional accommodations. The reference to others arriving is particularly concerning, as no visitors to the Cray property were observed or documented during this period. Whether these others were real individuals who somehow reached the property undetected or existed only in Lillian's increasingly disturbed perception remains unclear. The decisive turn in the case came on December 3, 1872, when a severe storm passed through Ozark County. Heavy rain fell for nearly 2 days, causing Bryant Creek to overflow its banks and flooding much of the low-lying land in the area. When the waters receded, they revealed something on the Cray property that had previously been hidden. James Wilson, who visited the farm to assess storm damage, provided this account. The entrance to the main tunnel had collapsed, and the water had washed away much of the surrounding soil. What I saw there, what was exposed, I still struggle to make sense of. It wasn't natural, the way the earth had been shaped beneath. There were chambers that looked almost like rooms, with walls that couldn't have been formed by any erosion I've ever seen. And there were markings, carvings, I suppose, though like none I recognized. Some resembled writing, but not in any language I know. Others seemed to be depictions of figures that were almost but not quite human in form. The whole thing gave me a terrible feeling, like I was looking at something I wasn't meant to see. Wilson's description, while vague, suggests that what Lillian had uncovered, or perhaps constructed, was more sophisticated than simple tunnels. The reference to carved markings is particularly puzzling, as no samples or detailed descriptions of these markings appear in any official records. What happened next is documented in multiple sources and represents the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. On the night of December 5th, several residents of properties near the Cray farm reported hearing what was described variously as wailing, singing, or chanting, coming from the direction of the western field. The sounds reportedly continued for several hours before ceasing abruptly around midnight. Martha Danvers's account is perhaps the most detailed. It began around dusk, a sound like voices, though not speaking any words I could recognize. At first I thought it might be the wind, but there was no mistaking the human quality to it. As night fell, the sounds grew louder and more rhythmic, with what seemed to be multiple voices joining in a kind of chorus or chant. There were pauses, as if in response to something I couldn't hear. Then the chanting would resume. I was too frightened to investigate, but I could see lights moving in the western field, not steady like lanterns, but flickering and darting about, as if carried by people moving quickly, or perhaps thrown from hand to hand. The sound stopped suddenly just before midnight. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the chanting had been. The following morning, Martha Danvers observed lights moving in the field and what appeared to be several figures moving around the collapsed tunnel entrance. Concerned, she sent her hired hand, Thomas Reed, to investigate. Reed never returned to provide a report. Alarmed by Reed's failure to return and the unusual activities observed, Martha Danvers traveled to Gainesville to alert Sheriff Davis. A group of 6 men, including the sheriff, returned to the Cray property that afternoon. What they found there has been the subject of speculation and controversy ever since. The official report filed by Sheriff Davis on December 7th states only that the property was found abandoned with evidence of recent occupation. The tunnel entrance had been cleared somewhat, though it remained partially collapsed. No individuals were found on the premises. A thorough search of the house revealed personal belongings apparently left behind, suggesting a hasty departure. No sign of Mr. Reed was discovered. This clinical description contrasts sharply with unofficial accounts that began to circulate in the days that followed. According to statements attributed to members of the search party, though never formally recorded, what they found at the tunnel entrance was far more disturbing than the sheriff's report suggests. One such account, from William Tanner, a blacksmith who accompanied the search party. There was blood, a considerable amount, around the cleared opening, and items scattered about that had no business being there. Candles arranged in some kind of pattern, a table with straps attached, tools I didn't recognize. Inside the house we found papers covered in writing that made no sense, not English or any language I know. The sheriff had us burn it all before we left. Said it was best if no one else saw it. I asked about reporting the blood, about searching for Reed or the widow, but Davis just shook his head, said some things were better left alone, that we should count ourselves lucky we hadn't arrived a day earlier. Another account, attributed to Frederick Collins, the county clerk who accompanied the search party to document findings. What disturbed me most was the state of the house. It looked as if it had been prepared for some kind of gathering. The dining table was set for 7, with plates and cutlery arranged neatly. But in the center, instead of food, was a collection of strange objects, stones with markings similar to those found in the tunnel, small figurines carved from what looked like bone, and a leather-bound book open to a page filled with drawings rather than text. The drawings depicted what appeared to be a ceremony of some kind, with figures gathered around a central pit or opening. Sheriff Davis confiscated the book before I could examine it further. No official record exists of any such items, and Sheriff Davis never publicly acknowledged these claims. What is documented, however, is that within a week of the search, Davis resigned his position and left Ozark County. His letter of resignation cited only personal reasons for his departure. His whereabouts after leaving Gainesville were never definitively established, though unverified reports placed him in St. Louis in early 1873. In the months that followed, the Cray property was left untouched. No effort was made to fill in the tunnels or investigate the disappearances further. By spring of 1873, vegetation had begun to reclaim the western field, though locals reported that nothing would grow directly over where the tunnels had been. This bare patch of earth remained visible for several years, according to county survey maps from 1875 and 1880. The property remained unoccupied until 1887, when, having been unclaimed for 15 years, it reverted to the county. During the subsequent survey and assessment, workers discovered the journal previously mentioned, along with a locked trunk in the attic of the house. The contents of this trunk, as inventoried by County Clerk Howard Phillips, included various personal effects of the former occupants, several books on geology and mining, a collection of unusual rock specimens, and a series of drawings depicting what appear to be cave formations or tunnels, annotated in an unrecognized script. Of particular interest among these items was a small wooden box containing 7 carved stone tablets, each approximately 4 inches square and half an inch thick. The inventory describes these as bearing markings similar to those reported in the tunnels. geometric patterns, and stylized figures arranged in rows that suggest writing or symbolic notation. Photographs of these tablets were supposedly taken for the county records, but no copies have survived. The trunk and its contents were stored in the county records office until 1923, when a fire destroyed much of the building and its archives. The journal survived only because it had been borrowed by local historian Margaret Walker, who was researching the history of early settlements in the area. Walker's notes on the journal, preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, indicate that the later entries become increasingly difficult to decipher, not just because of the deteriorating handwriting, but because the language itself seems to shift, incorporating unknown terms and phrases. She writes, "The final third of the journal represents a significant departure from conventional English. Familiar words are interspersed with terms that appear to be either neologisms invented by Mrs. Cray or borrowings from some unidentified language. The syntax similarly degrades, with sentences structured in ways that challenge comprehension. This linguistic drift parallels the increasingly disturbed content, references to voices, entities beneath the earth, and ceremonies or rituals of obscure purpose." The final dated entry, from December 4, 1872, reads, "The storm has revealed it at last. What they built here, what they left behind. The chamber is intact. Tomorrow we will open it fully. He speaks more clearly now, guiding our hands. The others have arrived to assist in the culmination. Soon the work will be complete." The reference to others is particularly troubling, given the disappearances that had occurred, and the observations of multiple figures at the site on December 6th. Who these individuals were and what became of them remains unknown. No records exist of strangers or visitors to Gainesville during this period, suggesting either that Lillian's others arrived and departed without interacting with the community, or that they existed only in her increasingly disturbed perception of reality. However, an entry in the Gainesville Hotel Register from December 1, 1872, shows the arrival of 3 individuals identified only as Smith, Brown, and Jones from St. Louis. According to the hotel proprietor's notes, these men paid in advance for 3 nights, but checked out unexpectedly on the morning of December 5th. No destination was recorded, and no further trace of them appears in county records. Whether these individuals were connected to the events at the Cray property remains speculative, but the timing is certainly suggestive. The case might have faded entirely from memory had it not been for a series of unusual discoveries in subsequent decades. In 1893, during excavation for a new well on a neighboring property, workers uncovered what was described as a section of worked stone wall approximately 8 feet below ground level. The wall, which extended horizontally for several feet before disappearing into the surrounding earth, was reported to bear markings similar to those described in accounts of the Cray tunnels. No further excavation was attempted, and the well was relocated to another section of the property. In 1912, a hunting party tracking a wounded deer reported finding a narrow opening in the hillside approximately half a mile from the former Cray property. One member of the party, Thomas Jenkins, claimed to have entered the opening and found a tunnel that appeared man-made, with smooth walls bearing strange markings. Jenkins allegedly ventured some distance into the tunnel before being overcome by a feeling of dread so intense it compelled retreat. The entrance was supposedly covered with rocks and branches before the hunting party departed, and subsequent attempts to relocate it were unsuccessful. In 1952, during the construction of a new county road that would pass near the former Cray property, workers uncovered a series of unusual limestone formations approximately 20 feet below the surface. Geologist Dr. Edward Harrison, called to examine the site, noted that while the formations appeared natural at first glance, closer inspection revealed subtle modifications that suggested human intervention. From Harrison's report, the passages show evidence of enlargement and refinement beyond what natural processes would produce. More significantly, several surfaces bear markings that, while heavily eroded, appear to be deliberate rather than the result of water or mineral action. The age of these modifications is difficult to determine, but they are certainly not recent. The patterns bear some resemblance to Native American pictographs, though they do not match any known tradition from this region. Most intriguing is a recurrent symbol resembling an inverted Y with a horizontal line through its stem, which appears at regular intervals along one wall of the primary passage. The discovery prompted a brief archaeological survey of the area, but no definitive conclusions were reached about the nature or purpose of the modifications. The road construction continued, sealing the formations beneath layers of gravel and asphalt. In 1957, a spelunking expedition in Tumbling Creek Cave, some 20 miles from the former Cray property, reported finding a chamber with walls bearing markings similar to those described in the Harrison report. Photography was attempted but yielded poor results due to the challenging conditions. A follow-up expedition the following year was unable to relocate the chamber, leading to speculation that the initial report was either mistaken or fabricated. However, one photograph from the 1957 expedition did survive, showing what appears to be a section of cave wall with faint but discernible markings. Analysis by Dr. William Foster, an archaeologist from the University of Missouri, concluded that the markings were consistent with deliberate human modification rather than natural processes, though he could not identify their cultural origin or purpose. In 1968, folklorist Dr. Eleanor Reed conducted a series of interviews with elderly residents of Ozark County as part of a broader study on Appalachian and Ozark folk beliefs. Among her subjects was Abigail Wilson, aged 92, who as a young girl had lived near the Cray property. In her interview, recorded on magnetic tape but never published, Wilson shared a local legend about Lillian Cray. The old folks said she found something in that field that wasn't meant to be found. Not treasure like some thought, but something older. They said she'd hear it calling to her at night, telling her where to dig. After she vanished, people wouldn't go near that place, especially not after dark. They said you could still hear her sometimes, still digging, still searching. And that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was that sometimes you'd hear something answering. This account, while clearly influenced by decades of rumor and superstition, aligns with the contemporary reports of Lillian hearing sounds from the western field and her obsessive excavation efforts. What it suggests in the realm of folklore, if not fact, is that whatever Lillian Cray sought, or perhaps found, beneath her property continued to exert an influence long after her disappearance. Wilson also shared a more specific and disturbing story. When I was about 15, this would have been around 1891, a group of boys from school decided to explore the old Cray place on a dare. 4 of them went out there one Saturday afternoon. Only 3 came back. They said Jimmy Miller had gone down into one of the holes that was still open then and never came back up. They called for him, even tried to go after him, but it was too dark and the passage too narrow. When they told their parents, a search was organized, but no trace of Jimmy was ever found. The holes were filled in after that, and the county put up no trespassing signs all around the property. No official record of this incident exists in county archives, which might suggest it was merely a folktale elaborated over time. However, examination of local cemetery records does confirm the death of a James Miller, aged 19, in 1891. The cause of death is listed simply as misadventure, a common designation for accidental deaths at the time. The Cray case represents a disturbing intersection of documented facts and unfillable gaps. What began as one woman's apparent descent into obsession expanded to encompass multiple disappearances, unexplained structures beneath the earth, and a final night of activity for which no satisfactory explanation has ever been provided. What we know with certainty is limited. Lillian Cray, following her husband's death, became fixated on excavating a particular field on her property. Her efforts grew increasingly elaborate and isolated her from the community. Several individuals connected to her or her property disappeared. Something was discovered or constructed beneath the western field. And then, in December of 1872, Lillian Cray and an unknown number of others vanished, leaving behind puzzling evidence that was subsequently minimized or destroyed. The questions that remain are numerous and unsettling. What drew Lillian to that specific location? What did she believe she would find there? Who were the others mentioned in her final journal entry, and what became of them? And perhaps most disturbingly, was what happened at Cray Hollow in 1872 an isolated incident, or part of something larger and more pervasive? In the years following the events at the Cray property, several unusual occurrences were reported in the surrounding area. In 1875, a series of minor earth tremors affected Ozark County, centered approximately on the location of the former Cray property. Geologists attributed these to natural seismic activity, though no such events had been recorded in the area previously. In 1883, a local farmer reported that his well, located about a mile from the Cray property, had suddenly begun producing water with a peculiar taste and odor. Analysis by a chemist from Springfield found unusual mineral content, but nothing harmful. The well was eventually abandoned when livestock refused to drink from it. Between 1890 and 1895, a series of disappearances occurred in the general vicinity. 3 hunters and a trapper who ventured into the woods near the former Cray property and never returned. Searches yielded no results. While such disappearances were not uncommon in the rugged terrain of the Ozarks, the concentration in both time and location is notable. In 1901, a Methodist minister newly arrived in Gainesville attempted to research the Cray case as part of a broader study on spiritual afflictions in rural communities. His inquiries were met with resistance, and he reported receiving anonymous threats warning him to abandon the project. He left the area shortly thereafter, his study uncompleted. In 1918, during excavation for a new county courthouse in Gainesville, workers uncovered a small metal box buried approximately 6 feet below ground level. The box, which appeared to have been deliberately buried rather than lost, contained a single item, a stone tablet approximately 4 inches square, bearing markings similar to those described in accounts of the Cray tunnels. The tablet was reportedly sent to a museum in St. Louis for examination, but was lost in transit. No record of its arrival exists in museum archives. In 1935, a folklore collector named Benjamin Hayes spent several months in Ozark County gathering local legends and tales. His notes, preserved in the American Folklore Society archives, include multiple references to the Cray case, suggesting it had by then been incorporated into the region's oral tradition. Hayes writes, "The story of the widow and her digging has evolved into a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and obsession. In some versions, she is portrayed as a victim, driven mad by grief. In others, as something more sinister, a practitioner of arcane arts who summoned entities from beneath the earth. What remains consistent across all accounts is the sense that the land itself is somehow implicated, that there was something in that particular place that should have remained undisturbed." In 1961, during renovations to the Gainesville courthouse, workers discovered a sealed metal box within a wall cavity. Inside was a single document, a letter signed by former Sheriff Davis, dated December 15, 1872, addressed to future authorities of Ozark County. The contents of this letter have never been made public, and county officials deny its existence. The document was reportedly transferred to state archives in Jefferson City, where it was classified and restricted from public access. However, a courthouse clerk who claimed to have seen the letter before it was removed described its contents as a warning about the Cray property and what lay beneath it. According to this anonymous source, Davis wrote that he had ordered the tunnel sealed and all records of the incident destroyed for the protection of the public mind. He allegedly concluded with the recommendation that the property should never be developed or excavated, regardless of future needs or interests. In 1963, a geological survey of Ozark County identified several anomalous subterranean formations in the vicinity of the former Cray property. The report describes these as cavities or chambers within the limestone bedrock that do not appear to conform to typical karst development patterns. The survey was conducted using early ground-penetrating radar technology, which was subject to significant limitations and error margins. A follow-up survey was recommended, but never conducted. In 1965, highway construction, approximately 3 miles from the former Cray property, uncovered what was described in the project engineer's report as a section of artificial tunnel or passageway. Work was temporarily halted while archaeological assessment was conducted. The final determination, as recorded in county files, was that the feature represented an abandoned mining test shaft of indeterminate age, though no mining activity had been documented in that specific location. An interesting footnote to this discovery appears in the personal correspondence of Dr. Harold Mitchell, the archaeologist who examined the site. In a letter to a colleague at the Smithsonian Institution, he writes, "The official explanation is convenient, but unlikely. The construction suggests techniques not commonly employed in 19th century American mining. More significant are the markings on the walls, which bear a striking resemblance to those documented in the Harrison Report of 1952. I have forwarded photographs under separate cover. I would appreciate your thoughts on possible cultural origins, as they match no traditions with which I am familiar." No response to this letter exists in Mitchell's papers, and the photographs he mentioned have never been located. The road that now passes near the former Cray property is traveled daily by residents and visitors, most unaware of what once transpired there. The western field, long since reclaimed by forest, shows no surface evidence of the extensive excavations described in historical accounts. The entrance to the tunnel system, if it still exists, lies hidden beneath decades of accumulated soil and vegetation. But beneath the surface, beneath the layers of time and deliberate forgetting, questions persist. What lies below the rolling hills of Ozark County? What secrets does the limestone bedrock hold? And what compelled Lillian Cray to dig so desperately, so obsessively, until she finally disappeared into the very earth she had sought to uncover? Some say the road near the old Cray property is prone to unusual phenomena, electrical disturbances, unexplained sounds, a persistent feeling of being watched. Engineers attribute these reports to natural features of the terrain, the way sound carries in the valleys, electromagnetic variations common to limestone regions. A reasonable explanation, certainly. Local legends continue to evolve around the Cray case. Some claim that on particularly still nights, the sound of digging can be heard emanating from the woods where the western field once lay. Others insist that electronic devices malfunction in the vicinity, batteries draining inexplicably, recordings becoming corrupted with strange noises. In 1967, a group of students from the University of Missouri attempted to locate the exact site of the Cray property as part of a project on local history. Using county records and survey maps, they identified what they believed to be the location of the western field. Their report notes that while the area was densely forested, a circular section approximately 1 acre in size contained no mature trees, only scrub vegetation that appeared stunted compared to surrounding growth. Soil samples taken from this area reportedly showed unusual mineral content and an unexpectedly high pH level. The students planned a more thorough investigation the following summer, but never returned to the site. The faculty advisor for the project, Dr. Thomas Reynolds, died unexpectedly of a heart attack 3 months later. His notes on the project were never located. In 1968, a hunter in the area reported finding a smooth stone tablet about the size of my hand near what was believed to be the former Cray property. The tablet, which he described as bearing strange geometric markings, was allegedly kept in his home for several weeks before disappearing. The hunter claimed no knowledge of how or when it vanished, stating only that one day it was on the shelf where I'd put it, and the next it was gone. Official interest in the Cray case has largely faded. The last documented reference in county records appears in a 1969 land use survey, which notes only that the parcel corresponding to the former Cray property was unsuitable for development due to unstable subsoil conditions. No elaboration is provided, and subsequent county planning documents make no specific mention of the site or its history. Yet still occasionally, usually in the quiet hours before dawn, travelers on that lonely stretch of road report seeing a solitary figure at the edge of the woods. A woman, they say, with wild hair and dirt-caked hands, staring intently at the ground as if listening for something only she can hear. And perhaps more disturbing, sometimes, they say, something answers. The Ozark Mountains keep their secrets well. Limestone dissolves slowly beneath the surface, creating caverns and passages that may remain undiscovered for centuries. Water flows through hidden channels, emerging miles from where it disappeared. Sound carries in unexpected ways, bouncing off rock faces and through hollow spaces. The story of Lillian Cray and what she found, or thought she found, beneath her western field has become part of this landscape, another layer in the complex stratigraphy of history and legend that makes up Ozark County. Perhaps, like the caves themselves, some stories are better left unexplored, some passages better left untraveled. Yet the questions remain, persistent as water, wearing away stone. What was the true nature of Lillian Cray's obsession? What did she uncover in that field in 1872? And what became of her and those who disappeared in her wake? The historical record offers few definitive answers, only fragments and suggestions. A journal with increasingly incoherent entries, reports of strange markings and structures beneath the earth, accounts of sounds and lights on a December night long ago. The rest is silence, or perhaps, for those who listen closely enough, the faint echo of digging that still emanates from that patch of woods on certain nights when the wind is still and the moon is dark. For those inclined to rational explanation, the Cray case represents nothing more than the tragic deterioration of a grief-stricken widow whose mental decline led to bizarre behavior and ultimately to her disappearance, perhaps by suicide or misadventure, in the tunnels she had excavated. The strange elements surrounding the case, the reports of unusual structures and markings, the multiple disappearances, the reluctance of officials to fully investigate or document, can be attributed to the superstitions of the time and the human tendency to elaborate and mythologize tragic events. Yet even this explanation leaves questions unanswered. What became of Herbert Leach, Jonathan Pruitt, and Thomas Reed? Why did Sheriff Davis resign and leave the area so abruptly after investigating the property? What was in the letter reportedly found in the courthouse wall, and why would it be classified and restricted from public access? Perhaps some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved, some questions unanswered. The story of Lillian Cray and her fateful obsession with what lay beneath that western field in Ozark County stands as a reminder that beneath the surface of the known world, beneath the comfortable explanations and rational understandings, there may be deeper currents, older truths, that occasionally break through into our ordered lives with disturbing implications. And somewhere in the forests of Ozark County, where the trees grow thick except for one peculiar clearing, the earth still holds whatever secret called to Lillian Cray across the decades, across the veil between what is known and what is only suspected. It waits, patient as stone, enduring as the hills themselves. Perhaps it is still waiting for someone else to hear its call, to begin digging once again.